Hello everyone, welcome to the editorial analysis brought by Shankar IAS Academy, 22nd January 2025. Displayed here are the list of articles that we will be discussing today. The first article, India-USA nuclear deal. The article is taken from the newspaper The Hindu. In this topic, we will be discussing the relevance of the India-USA nuclear deal, which was signed in the year 2008. And the next article, A Pact in Peril. This article is taken from the newspaper Indian Express. It is talking about the Trump administration's decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, which was signed in the year 2015. And in this topic, we will be discussing Paris Agreement, its target, its provisions, challenges and limitations faced by the Paris Agreement, and what will be the potential impact of the United States decision. So without much delay, let's begin our discussion. Time to seize the promise of the US-India nuclear deal. The article is taken from the newspaper The Hindu. We know that India at present is a land for nearly 1.4 billion population. And on the other side, the climate change is posing a great threat to every part of the world. And we have discussed a lot of articles related to climate change in both our newspaper analysis and in editorial analysis. And in this context, we have a news article which is talking about the relevance or the importance of nuclear energy. So what is nuclear energy? Nuclear energy means energy released by the nucleus of an atom, right? So there are two ways we can produce nuclear energy. First is nuclear fission and second is nuclear fusion. Nuclear fission means splitting the nucleus of an atom, which releases huge amount of energy in the form of heat. And the next way is the nuclear fusion, which is a process which is actually happening in sun and stars and all. So here the two small light nucleus will combine together and will form a heavy nuclei. So it also will create more energy, right? And the another major problem associated with this nuclear fusion is that it is very difficult to control if you lose control over the process. And at the same time, this nuclear energy has a lot of benefits. For example, it is very helpful in reducing the carbon emission. And at the same time, the nuclear energy is a high density energy, which means with the less quantity of energy, fuel, we can produce huge amount of energy. But on the other side, we also have certain concerns related to the nuclear energy. The first one is the nuclear waste, and it creates significant damage to the environment and to the human health. And there's a possibility of misuse of this nuclear energy. And we know that especially after the World War time, that is in the post-war era, the nuclear energy played a significant role in shaping the global order too, because America was the first nation to develop the nuclear energy and to test the nuclear energy, and followed by the World War II, other nations including the Soviet Union, France, Britain, they all developed the nuclear energy by the 1960s. India and Pakistan, they tested nuclear energy, conducted nuclear experiment in the 1970s. And still, that the great powers of the 20th century were they had good awareness about the catastrophe of the catastrophic side of the nuclear energy. That's why they came together and they formed something called the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So as per this Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the countries which already developed the nuclear energy is there, but the countries which did not develop the nuclear energy should not develop the nuclear energy in the upcoming days. That was the major provision of this non-proliferation treaty. But India did not sign this treaty in the 1966. And also we know that we conducted the nuclear experiment in the name of Smiling Buddha, and very soon Pakistan also conducted nuclear experiments. Therefore, even today we know that it can bring a significant change. At the same time, it can also bring catastrophe to the human society, to every part of the world. So in this context, let us discuss more about the importance of this India nuclear deal. I hope you understand what is the relevance of the nuclear energy and how it is shaping the global order and all. Now we are going to discuss more about the India nuclear deal and its related provisions, and then we will also see how it will be useful in strengthening the Indo-US relation, and what are the other efforts taken by the Indian government to acquire more sustainable source of energy, and what are the reasons behind the a reduced phase of nuclear energy developments in India. So these are the things that we are going to see. So without much delay, let's begin our discussion. First we will see the India-US nuclear deal 2008, and it is also known as 123 agreement. So we know that India was not a part of the non-proliferation treaty. So there was according to the nuclear laws in United States, the United States should not conduct nuclear cooperation or with the countries which are not party to the non-proliferation treaty. That was the that was a provision there. So what happened is that in 2006 there was something called Hyde Act was passed in the US, and this act we will discuss shortly. And this Hyde Act, followed by this Hyde Act, the nuclear cooperation between the India and the United States opened since 2006. And to give a legal backing to that, India and USA signed this nuclear agreement, Indo-US nuclear agreement, in the year 2008. So it was a landmark agreement signed in the year 2008, which enabled India's integration into the global nuclear order, despite not being as signatory to the non-proliferation treaty. So according to the nuclear laws in the United States should not conduct a nuclear experiment, or they should not cooperate with other nations in the field of nuclear if they are not the member to the non-proliferation treaty. But this law allowed this nuclear deal followed by the Hyde Act, allowed the USA to conduct nuclear cooperation with India, and this marked a significant step in Indo-US strategic partnership in the coming days. And now we are going to see what are the progress achieved followed by that to in the field of nuclear energy developments in India. So first of all, legislative support in USA, that is known as Hyde Act, which was signed in the year 2006, and followed by that India also signed nuclear agreements with other nations including Japan, Russia, China, Australia, etc. And like I mentioned, the nuclear deal of 2008 strengthened the Indo-US strategic partnership. On other side of the Hindu article, we can see there is a small criticism regarding the limited progress of the nuclear energy developments in India. So what were the reasons behind that? The first major reason is the high cost. We know that in the nuclear projects, it requires huge expenditure. Therefore, the nuclear projects are more expensive than compared to the other alternative sources of renewable energy. And next we have the regulatory and bureaucratic delays. For example, USA getting a market or getting a space in the United States is not easy. You have to go through a lot of bureaucratic and regulatory hurdles. And at the same time, in India we have something called and also we discussed when we said that till 2006 the US was not allowed to conduct any open nuclear cooperation with India. That was done only after the passing of this Hyde Act. And in the case of India, we have something called the Civilian Liability Act 2010. As per the Civil Liability Act, if there is any failure in the nuclear machinery, for example, if there is a failure in the reactor of the in the nuclear plant, then the suppliers will be held responsible for that. And this discouraged the investments in the field of nuclear energy from outside. And the major reason was the public resistance. That is, we know that Kudankulam is the best example that we have in India. And at the same time, especially after the Fukushima nuclear plant incident, which killed one person on the spot, and followed by that many people died in the coming days, in the following years, followed by this incident. And this Fukushima nuclear power plant incident accident is considered as the worst nuclear disaster since 1986. We know what happened in 1986. That was the accident in the Chernobyl power plant in the Soviet Russia, right? And the next is the geopolitical tensions, because issues with the non-proliferation commitments and the legacy bilateral concerns. We know that since India was not a part of this NPT, so that's why for decades we couldn't cooperate with the United States in the field of nuclear energy. And technological gaps in India. For example, India is still depending on pressurized heavy water reactors, which is outdated, and it got replaced with light water reactors these days. Coming to the other legal barriers behind the progression of the nuclear energy, the first is the US regulatory restrictions. That is, US Atomic Energy Act of 1954 restricts the nuclear equipment manufacturing and design work with India, because we know that is 1953, and that time India was an infant nation. 1947 only we got independence, and that was a time of Cold War. And that in the late 1940s or the early 1950s in United States is considered as a McCarthy era, which means India was a member of non-alignment movement, but the United States and the Western Bloc considered India as an ally of Russia, Soviet Union. And maybe that may be the one of the reasons behind the restrictions imposed on India-US relationship in the field of nuclear cooperation. And India Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act 2010 we discussed that in the beginning. So if there is any damage to the nuclear reactor or any machinery, or if there is any accident in the nuclear plants, then the suppliers will be held responsible for that, and this discouraged foreign investments in the field of nuclear energy in India. Now we are going to see the opportunities for Indo-US civil nuclear cooperation. First is the role of iCET framework, that is Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology. This was signed between India and USA, and this encourages innovation and joint manufacturing of nuclear components between India and USA, and it also facilitates deployment of American atomic reactors in India. The next is focus on small modular reactors, and this will be very useful in encouraging in the India-USA cooperation in the field of nuclear energy, because India, we are very good at providing service, and therefore we can provide a good quality service at a low cost. So this has a potential to further strengthen India-USA relation in the field of nuclear energy in the coming days. And the next is cooperation on light water reactors. We know that we are focusing on heavy pressurized water reactors, but that is outdated. Therefore, this collaboration in the field of light water reactors can enhance the nuclear cooperation between India and USA. At the same time, this is cost effective. At the same time, we can also provide service to USA. And this can also address the problem of technological gap between India and the USA, because the technological gap can, to reduce this technological gap, it will take a very long time. It also needs huge investment. So once we start focusing on the updated technologies, then everything will go much smoother. So now we are going to see what we can give as a suggestion to improve the nuclear cooperation between India and the USA. The first major suggestion can be easing the trade restrictions. We know that in India, we have the Civil Liability Act of 2010, which imposes the responsibility on the suppliers if there is any fault in the reactor, or if there is an accident in the nuclear power plant. And at the same time, US also has strong regulations and bureaucratic hurdles. So once we can overcome relax all this, then we can strengthen the relation between India and USA. And the next is reducing dependence on China, which means collaborative efforts to counter China's influence in nuclear technology, clean energy, and supply chains. Initiatives like expanding iPhone manufacturing in India. So we know that China, they are known as a manufacturing hub of the world. So once we can collaborate with the USA for in a better way through updating our technology, through relaxing our trade barriers and other legal formalities, then we can reduce our dependence on China. And at the same time, we can also take a significant step to attain sustainable development. And the final is ensuring technology security, because the biggest concern associated with the nuclear energy is the possibility of misuse of the nuclear power. And for that also we need to take a lot of steps. And the USA, they are committed to prevent China, Russia, and other superpowers from misusing the advanced nuclear technologies. And at the same time, we can ensure the peace in Indo-Pacific region, which is very essential for our commercial interest, our strategic interest, and at the same time for the security of the people also. In this topic, we discussed the Indo-USA nuclear deal 2008. What were the reasons behind the slow progress of nuclear developments in India, and what can be done, and what are the other initiatives taken by the government to enhance our nuclear cooperation with other nations, especially with the USA. So these are the topics that we discussed in this article. So based on the discussion, try to answer this mains practice question. The question is, discuss the significance of the US-India nuclear deal agreement in strengthening bilateral relations and India's energy security. Highlight the challenges in its implementation and just suggest the measures to overcome them. So this question has 3 parts. You have to address 3 parts. The first part, you have to talk about the significance of the US-India civil nuclear agreement. So here itself you have 2 important points. First point is it strengthens the bilateral relation between India and the USA, and the next is ensures the energy security, because the nuclear fuel has huge energy density. Therefore, it enhances the energy security, because less fuel, more energy can be generated in the case of nuclear fuel. Right? And the second part, you have to talk about the challenges in its implementation. We discussed the challenges, for example, the bureaucratic hurdles, public resistance, at the same time possibility of misuse, and the geopolitical dynamism in the world. That means the strained relation between USA, Russia, and China. And at the same time, on the other side, India have to maintain a balance between these three nations. And you can write all this as challenges and suggest the measures to overcome them. So we discussed that means relaxing the trade barriers, legal formalities, and then reducing dependence on China, conducting high-level diplomatic meetings, and trust building efforts can be taken. So these are the measures we can take. Trust building measures are very important to ensure that the nuclear energy is not misused by our nation or any other nation. And these are the measures can be taken to overcome those challenges. So try to answer the mains practice question based on our discussion, and post it in the comment section. We will review and reply for your answer. Now it's time to move to the next topic. A pact in peril. The article is taken from the newspaper Indian Express. We know that one of the biggest challenges of this 21st century is the climate crisis, and it needs a collective effort too. But at the same time, the newly formed Trump administration in the United States has decided to come out from the Paris Agreement, which was signed in the year 2015. And this Paris Agreement was considered as a recent victory against our climate crisis. And this article is actually a criticism to the present Trump administration's decision to come out from the Paris Agreement. In this context, let us discuss more about the Paris Agreement, its objective, provisions, and then we are also going to see what will be the potential impact of this United States decision regarding the withdrawal from Paris Agreement. So without much delay, let's begin our discussion. So Paris Agreement, like I mentioned in the beginning, it is a recent victory against the climate crisis, and it was signed, it was adopted in COP21, which was held in Paris in the year 2015, and this Paris Agreement came to force in 2016 November, nearly after 1 year. And this Paris Climate Agreement was the foundation for later years climate negotiation. But what was there before the Paris Agreement? So to understand about a short history of the climate negotiation, you have to start from the 1992 Earth Summit, which was held in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And this Earth Summit resulted into adaptation of something called United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We are more familiar with that, right? Every day we are seeing this in newspaper, and we all know about what is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this was adopted in the year 1992. And after 5 years, that is in the year 1997, the world nations once again came together and they met in Kyoto in Japan, and the result was Kyoto Protocol. And this Kyoto Protocol was based on a principle known as common but differentiated responsibility, and that's why the Kyoto Protocol imposed strict and binding restrictions on highly industrialized and developed nations, including USA and China. And that is the reason why United States and China refused to accept the Kyoto Protocol. And this Kyoto Protocol was the base for the climate negotiation for next 1 decade, and that is till 2015. And in the year 2011, there was an amendment to the Kyoto Protocol in the climate conference held in Durban, that is in South Africa. And now we are going to see, coming back to the Paris Climate Agreement, we are going to see the objective of this Paris Agreement. General objectives of this Paris Agreement are reducing greenhouse gas emission, limiting global warming. They are almost similar to the Kyoto Protocol. And the biggest success of this Paris Climate Agreement is that it is adopted by nearly 196 nations. And now we are going to see the objectives in more detail. First is limiting the global warming. That means limiting the global warming below 2 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial level. For example, during the time of 16th or the 17th century, before the industrialization, if the average temperature of the earth was, let's say it is 30 degree, then the Paris Climate Agreement is working to reduce or to limit the global warming or the temperature from rising beyond 32 degrees Celsius. I hope you understand. And the next objective of this Paris Agreement is establishing climate justice. We know that the climate change is a global phenomena, but the impact is severely unequal, because we know that the underdeveloped, developing, and small island nations are at the biggest risk of this climate change, and that's why they are standing for the efforts against the climate change. We witnessed that in the COP29, which was held in Baku in Azerbaijan. And how we can establish this climate justice. So before that, we know that the climate change can bring a lot of impact. For example, it can create social tensions because of the increasing rate of poverty, hunger, unemployment. At the same time, the climate crisis can also bring other potential challenges to the human society in the form of disease, and that's why the Paris Agreement has a lot of provisions regarding NDCs, that is nationally determined contribution, and also Paris Agreement talks about financial assistance to the underdeveloped, developing, and small states. We will discuss that in the upcoming slides. So establishing climate justice is another major objective of the Paris Agreement, and the long-term goal of this Paris Agreement is achieving a carbon neutral economy. Carbon neutral means zero carbon economy. For example, in an economy, if there is an emission of 100-ton carbon, then there should be steps or measures to sequestrate that 100-ton carbon. So in the end of the day, the carbon in the economy will be zero. So this is what it is called, carbon neutral economy. And coming to the key provisions in the Paris Climate Agreement, the first is global provisions regarding the global temperature limit. We discussed that reducing the temperature, limiting the temperature 2 degrees below from the pre-industrial level, and taking efforts to limit the temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius. The target is 2 degrees, but we should work for 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the next is NDC, that is nationally determined contributions. The Article 4, paragraph 2 of the Paris Agreement talks about the nationally determined contribution. So here the nations can take voluntary domestic mitigation policies to combat the climate change. The best example is India's net zero 2070, and we also know several other nations, based on their capacity, they are committed to climate targets. For example, net zero 2060 is there, China's climate target, and there are certain nations committed to net zero 2050, 45, and 2030. And the next is climate financing. We know that the climate financing is very important for both mitigative and adaptative efforts. So according to the Paris Agreement of 2015, the developed nations are pledged to provide $100 billion per year by 2030 to assist the underdeveloped, developing, and the small states to combat the climate change crisis. And the next is adaptation and loss and damage fund, because we know that in COP29 the loss and damage fund was adopted was established. COP27 which was held in Egypt. In this COP27 the loss and damage fund was established, and in COP28 which was held in UAE, that is United Arab Emirates, the loss and damage fund was adopted. So this was a great relief for the vulnerable states who are at the high risk of climate change, especially the nations in the Southern Pacific Ocean and the nations in the Atlantic Oceans. And the next is the transparency and the accountability. That means there will be regular monitoring on the efforts taken by the nations in the fight against climate change. And recently in the news we saw something called the global stock take. So it is a mechanism to assess the the efforts taken by the nations in the fight against climate change, and the report was not that much impressive. We read that in the news, and we also saw a lot of discussions related to that, and we also done a video about the global stock take from prelims perspective. And the next is mitigation and adaptation. That means the Paris Agreement is giving importance to both mitigation and adaptation efforts. So mitigation means working on the cost to reduce the impact or to solve the problem. On other side, adaptation means adapting with the change. If, for example, if there is an increase in the temperature, if you are using air conditioner, then that is adaptation. But if you are going for deforestation to reduce the rising temperature, then that is mitigation. In the case of Paris Climate Agreement, it is giving importance to both the mitigation and adaptation. And coming to the limitations or the challenges faced by the Paris Agreement, we can see that the first is voluntary commitments. That means the nations are voluntary, they are going with their voluntary domestic policies against climate change, and there is no strict enforcement of these policies. And the next is insufficient targets. Considering the present phase of the accelerated climate change, the goal of set by the Paris Agreement itself became a matter of question in certain occasions. And the next is financing issues, because we know that there are delay and doubts, confusions regarding the contribution to this, the pledged amount. For example, United States itself, we can see during the previous Trump administration time also, we saw that the United States withdrew from the Paris Agreement. and again they withdrew from the Paris Agreement. So these are creating confusions regarding the contribution to the pledged amount. And the next is the conflict between the developed and the developing nation. We can also say that the conflict between the north and south regarding the climate change. So we saw that during the time of the Kyoto Protocol itself, the principle common but differentiated responsibility, it was not supported by many developed nations, including critical nations such as China and the United States. And the next is lack of political will to take efforts. The best example is the Trump administration itself. And the next is geopolitical tensions. So means the trade war and other misunderstandings between the nations, and between the nations can limit or discourage the efforts against the climate change. Now we are going to see the Paris Agreement and the United States. So this is a short timeline. So the Paris Agreement, like I mentioned, it was signed in the year 2015, and that time the President of America was Barack Obama, and during this time he committed to cut the emission by 26 to 28% by 2025 from the 2005 levels. And in the year 2016, Trump administration came to power in United States, and they withdrew from the Paris Agreement. And in the year 2020, again Joe Biden administration came to power in United States, and again the USA, they joined the Paris Agreement, and you can see a lot of developments followed by that. For example, the new collective quantified goal, which is looking for a much higher climate financing beyond $100 billion, and the nuclear fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. All this framework became a matter of discussion in the COP29 in Azerbaijan recently, but unfortunately COP29 wasn't impressive, and it wasn't that much successful as we expected. And again we can see that when Trump administration joined the Paris Agreement in 2021, you can see that they committed to reduce the emission by 50 to 55% by 2030. But again, now in the year 2025, the Trump administration came to power, and they are going back to the old policy, Trump administration's policy itself. And now we are going to see the potential implication of US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. The first major impact is the global impact, that means reduced global commitment to the climate change and potential scaling back by other nations. If you read the article from the Indian Express, you can see that when the critical nations like China and the USA, when they are not supporting, definitely this will discourage other nations to take help too. This will definitely discourage other nations to take steps to mitigate climate crisis. For example, the Iran, Yemen, Libya, all these developed in all these nations in Africa, they did not give that much importance to the protocols under the Paris Agreement. So when there is no leader, maybe we can say that the US is a superpower, there is no doubt in that. So when there is no a superpower like nation to take up the leadership, definitely this will discourage other nations too, especially the developing and underdeveloped nations. And the next is domestic effect. That means there will be a policy reversal in the United States itself, which supports the fossil fuels. The fossil fuels are the primary factor behind the accelerated climate change. We know that. And the next is financial consequences. For example, the US is a superpower both industrially and in the terms of industrial, as well as financially also they are superpower. So the withdrawal of the United States from Paris Agreement brings a lot of questions regarding the $100 billion to the developing nations and underdeveloped nations. And the next is geopolitical implications. That means this can create a gap, like I mentioned in the beginning. Absence of a superpower like USA can create a gap in a collective effort against the climate crisis. And maybe we cannot say that there will be a potential replacement by other nations like China or European Union. There's a possibility, but anyway, US is a great power, so the presence of USA is very important. At the same time, their commitment is very important because they are one of the biggest emitters too. So US role in the climate mitigation or the efforts against climate change is very crucial. So in this topic we discussed the Paris Agreement, its objective, key provisions, and the challenges faced by the Paris Agreement, and what will be the potential implication of the withdrawal of US from the Paris Agreement. So based on our discussion, try to answer this prelims mains practice question. The question is, examine the implications of the United States decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. Discuss the potential challenges it poses for global climate negotiations and emission reduction targets. So the question is asking about what will be the potential implication of the United States decision regarding the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. We discussed that there will be a gap in the leadership in the fight against the climate crisis. Climate financing will be, a question mark. At the same time, this can discourage a lot of other nations, including in the newspaper itself. There are certain nations mentioned like Yemen, Libya, Iran, and all. And so this will be the potential implication of the withdrawal of the decision made by the United States regarding the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. So try to answer the mains practice question and post it in the comment section. We will review and we will reply for your answer. With this, we are coming to the conclusion for today's editorial analysis. If you like the video, hit the like button, give your feedbacks as comments, and share this content with your friends. And before leaving this channel, don't forget to subscribe to Shankar IAS Academy and also hit the bell icon to receive on-time update. Thank you. Have a nice day.